This is Etna, Pennsylvania in 1937, a small borough just outside of Pittsburgh, where daily life moved at a steady and familiar pace. As you observe these streets and faces, consider this. If you could step back in time to this day, what would life really feel like here? This footage captures ordinary people going about their routines, walking to work, shopping along the main streets, and living life exactly as it looked during that time. Nothing here is staged, nothing is rehearsed, and that is what makes it valuable. It is a simple, honest record of a community in motion. In 1937, the country was finally climbing out of the Great Depression, slowly and with effort. Jobs were returning, mill shifts were stabilizing, and families were doing their best to rebuild the security they had lost earlier in the decade. In places built around steel, manufacturing, and river commerce, steady work meant everything, and when people in Etna saw the mills running again, there was a sense that life might finally be improving. As you watch people moving through these streets, you can imagine how much of their day and their hopes were tied to whether those jobs held steady. Neighborhoods were close, churches were full, and businesses along Butler Street were supported by residents who knew the shop owners personally. Families planned their weeks around work schedules, school routines, household chores, and community activities. Because this was a time when stability mattered more than anything else. People focused on what they could control. They made the most of what they had, and they relied heavily on their neighbors, their churches, and their own determination to carry them forward. When you see people stopping to talk on the sidewalks, it is more than small talk. It is the daily glue that held the town together. It is a clear window into the everyday world that shaped an entire generation, long before many of the major changes that the next decade would bring. I'm Rowan, and this is OTRA Legends. For most families here, work centered around the industries that defined the Pittsburgh region, especially steel, manufacturing, railroads, and river commerce. Daily life for many began and ended with the rhythm of the mills, which operated around the clock and depended on a steady supply of labor. A large number of men worked in the steel mills along the Allegheny River, where jobs were physically demanding, often hot and sometimes dangerous. These positions included roles such as furnace tenders, rollers, crane operators, laborers, and machine operators, each essential to keeping production moving. Beyond the mills, many residents worked in foundries, machine shops, and tool and die shops, which supported Pittsburgh's broader industrial economy. Others held jobs with the railroads, serving as switchmen, brakemen, conductors, or maintenance crews. The rail lines passing through the region were vital for transporting goods, steel, coal, and everyday supplies. There were also jobs in river-related industries, including barge operations, coal transport, and dock work. These jobs required strength, long hours, and familiarity with the heavy industrial environment that shaped the region. As you see men moving with purpose in this footage, you can picture where many of them were headed. Long shifts in the mills, shops, or rail yards that powered the region. Not everyone worked in heavy industry, and the town relied on a variety of smaller trades and services. Local shops employed clerks, bakers, butchers, and barbers, while garage mechanics repaired cars that were becoming increasingly common. Women frequently contributed through sewing, laundry, or clerical positions, while many others managed the home full-time, handling cooking, cleaning, and household management, which were significant responsibilities in 1937. Teachers, nurses, and secretaries also played essential roles within the community, providing stability and support in schools, clinics, and local offices. Wages in 1937 were modest, reflecting the slow recovery from the Great Depression. Skilled workers in the mills or railroads might earn around 40 to 50 cents an hour, while laborers earned less. A steady paycheck was valued above all else because employment had been uncertain for years prior. People counted themselves fortunate to have dependable work, and families built their budgeting, routines, and futures around the hope that their jobs would remain stable. Even with long hours and strict schedules, steady work brought peace of mind, and it allowed households in Etna to regain their footing during a time of national recovery. When you see a man in a work coat or carrying a lunch pail in this film, you are looking at someone whose entire household depended on that regular wage. Money in 1937 stretched much farther than it does today, but wages were also significantly lower, and families in Etna managed their budgets with discipline and care. A skilled steelworker or railroad employee might bring home around 40 to 50 cents an hour, and many laborers earned closer to 30 cents. For a typical household, a full week of work provided just enough to cover rent, groceries, coal for heating, and basic necessities. Every paycheck mattered, and most families saved whenever possible, even if the amount set aside each month was small. The cost of goods reflected the economic conditions of the time. Everyday items were affordable, but purchasing decisions were thoughtful. A loaf of bread cost around 9 cents, a gallon of milk about 26 cents, and a dozen eggs, roughly 28 cents. Butter averaged around 31 cents a pound, and a pound of coffee could be purchased for about 25 cents. Families cooked most meals at home, using simple ingredients and avoiding waste, because nothing was thrown away unless it was completely used up. Leftovers were common, and home gardens supplemented grocery budgets when space allowed. Clothing was purchased sparingly, and when it was, families invested in durable items meant to last. A pair of men's work boots cost around $2 to $3, which was a significant expense, and a good winter coat could cost $5 to $8. Many families relied on mending and sewing to extend the life of clothes, and hand-me-downs were practical, not something people looked down upon. Shoes were resoled rather than replaced, and coats were often passed from one child to the next. Housing was modest but manageable for most working families. Rent for a small home or apartment in a town like Etna typically ranged from $20 to $30 a month. Home ownership was possible for some, especially those with stable mill or railroad jobs, but many families rented throughout their lives. Coal deliveries were a regular part of winter, and households spent a notable portion of their income keeping their homes warm. Electricity was available in most homes, but not all appliances were common yet, and many families still used ice boxes instead of electric refrigerators. Families lived within their means, worked hard, and focused on necessities. Even though money was tight, communities like Etna found ways to get by, supporting one another and managing their households with a steady sense of responsibility. As you continue watching this footage, you might ask yourself, with what you see on screen, could you live this way today, on this kind of budget, with this kind of discipline? Getting around Etna in 1937 was a simple, predictable part of daily life, because most people stayed close to home and relied on practical means of travel. Walking was the most common form of transportation, and the layout of the borough made it easy for residents to reach work, school, shops, and churches on foot. Streets were active throughout the day, with people running errands, children moving between school and home, and workers heading to and from the mills or rail yards with lunch pails in hand. This steady movement gave the town a familiar rhythm, one that everyone recognized. Streetcars were an essential part of travel during this time, and they connected Etna to Pittsburgh and other nearby neighborhoods along the Allegheny River. The streetcars were affordable, consistent, and widely used, especially by workers and families who did not own a car. Buses were also becoming more common, but streetcars remained the preferred option for many because they had been reliable for decades. These routes made it possible for residents to reach workplaces, shopping districts, and entertainment areas without needing personal vehicles. Automobiles were increasing in number, but they were still far from universal, and most households did not own one. When cars did appear on the streets of Etna, they were typically sturdy, modest models such as the Ford Model A, the Chevrolet Master Series, or mid-range Plymouth and Dodge sedans. A new car cost between $600 and $900, which was a substantial investment for a working family. Gasoline was inexpensive, but people used it sparingly, and travel outside the borough was done only when necessary. Most errands involved visiting local shops, and long-distance trips were rare. Roads were paved but narrow, and drivers shared them with streetcars, delivery trucks, bicycles, wagons, and pedestrians. Traffic moved slowly, partly because cars were less powerful and partly because people were cautious, knowing repairs were costly and not easily taken care of. Street safety depended on patience and awareness, and most drivers took their time. Watching this footage today, you might notice how many people are on foot and how different these streets feel compared to the traffic and speed we are used to now. School life in Etna in 1937 followed a structured, predictable routine, and children were expected to be disciplined, attentive, and respectful in the classroom. Most students walked to school each morning, carrying books and a simple lunch pail, because bus transportation was limited and families rarely used cars for daily drop-offs. Schools were neighborhood-based, and students often knew one another for years, which created a strong sense of familiarity within the classroom. Teachers managed large groups of students, sometimes 30 or 40 at a time, and they relied on clear rules and consistent expectations to keep the school day moving. The curriculum focused on the fundamentals, including reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, history, and penmanship. Lessons were often taught through memorization and repetition, and students were expected to recite answers aloud when called upon. Industrial arts classes taught boys practical skills such as woodworking and mechanical basics, while home economics classes introduced girls to cooking, sewing, and household responsibilities. These subjects prepared students for the practical demands of adult life. High school attendance was growing, but it was not yet universal. Many teenagers left school after 8th grade to work, especially if their families needed additional income. Boys often took jobs in the mills, rail yards, or local shops, while girls helped at home or worked in service roles. After school, children spent much of their time outdoors because most households expected them to help with chores before playing. Kids handled tasks such as carrying coal, tending small gardens, helping with laundry, watching younger siblings, or running errands to local shops. When chores were done, the neighborhood became a shared playground. Children played games like marbles, hopscotch, and tag, or gathered in makeshift ball fields for baseball games. Many children also participated in church activities, youth meetings, and community events that brought families together. Childhood in 1937 was shaped by responsibility, routine, and independence. Children learned early how to manage expectations at home and school, and they grew up understanding the value of work and cooperation. Family life in Etna in 1937 was centered around routine, responsibility, and the practical needs of the household. Most families lived in modest homes that were built decades earlier, often with narrow rooms, steep staircases, and shared bedrooms. Houses were heated with coal, which required regular maintenance and steady deliveries throughout the winter. Kitchens were equipped with cast iron stoves, simple cupboards, and ice boxes that relied on blocks of ice rather than electricity. Families worked together to keep the home running smoothly, and every member, including children, had a role in maintaining daily order. Household chores were a constant part of life. Women typically managed cooking, cleaning, laundry, and sewing, tasks that demanded time and effort every day. Laundry was washed by hand or with early washing machines, then hung to dry on outdoor lines or in basements during colder months. Meals were cooked from scratch using staples like potatoes, bread, beans, meat, and seasonal produce. Leftovers were reused, and nothing was wasted. Ironing clothing, mending garments, and scrubbing floors were weekly routines that kept the household in good condition. Evenings were predictable and family-oriented. After work, men returned home for dinner, which was usually eaten together at the kitchen table. Families listened to the radio for news, music, or serialized programs that were popular at the time. Board games, card games, or simple conversations filled the rest of the evening because entertainment options were limited. Many families also attended local events at churches, fire halls, or community centers, where gatherings brought neighbors together for meals, celebrations, or fundraisers. Most homes operated on strict budgets, and families prioritized essentials over conveniences. Clothing was bought only when necessary, and new items were handled with care to ensure they lasted. Many families grew small gardens to supplement their groceries, and neighbors frequently traded or shared produce. Home repairs were often done by the residents themselves, especially by those who worked in the mills or learned trades through the eye. Babs. The ability to fix things, repurpose materials, and stretch household resources was highly valued. Watching this footage now, you might find yourself wondering, in a world with far more convenience, if we still hold on to that same level of resourcefulness. Main Street life in Etna in 1937 was practical, predictable, and built around the needs of working families. Most residents did their shopping locally, which meant that the stores along Butler Street and the surrounding side roads played a major role in daily routines. These businesses were small, family-run, and dependable, and they stocked the basics that households needed from week to week. The shop owners usually lived in the same community they served, and they knew their customers by name, which created a sense of trust and familiarity that shaped the way people shopped. Grocery shopping looked very different from what we know today. Families visited small markets and butcher shops, each offering specific items rather than the wide variety found in modern stores. Fresh meat was purchased from a butcher who cut it to order. Bread often came from a local bakery, and dry goods like flour, sugar, beans, and rice were measured out in bulk. Produce was seasonal and limited to what could be grown locally or transported at a reasonable cost. Customers paid in cash or kept a running tab with the shop owner, settling the balance at the end of the week or month, which was a common practice in tight-knit communities. Other small businesses filled essential roles in town life. Hardware stores carried tools and supplies needed for home repairs, and many families relied on these shops to maintain their houses through the changing seasons. Tailors and shoe repair shops were important as well, because clothing and footwear were made to last and needed regular upkeep. Barbershops served not only as grooming services, but also as social gathering spots, where men caught up on news, sports, and local events. Drugstores offered basic medical supplies, household items, and soda fountains, which provided a simple treat for children and adults alike. Shopping in 1937 was purposeful and efficient, and most families purchased only what they needed. There were no impulse buys, no large packaged goods, and very few conveniences. People often carried their purchases home by hand, because cars were limited and walking was the norm. Store hours reflected the work schedules of the community, with businesses opening early and closing in time for families to return home for dinner. Sundays were quiet, because many shops closed to allow families to attend church and spend time together. As you see storefronts and sidewalks in this footage, you might think about your own local main street and how much of that personal connection has been lost, or in some places still remains. Community life in Etna in 1937 was shaped by close relationships, shared routines, and strong cultural ties. Many families had lived in the borough for generations, and new residents often came from immigrant communities that were firmly established throughout the Pittsburgh region. Families of German, Polish, Slovak, Italian, and Irish descent made up much of the population, and each group brought its own traditions, foods, and customs. These cultural backgrounds blended into the daily life of the town, creating neighborhoods that were diverse, familiar, and supportive. Churches played a central role in the community, serving as places of worship, gathering, and social connection. Many families organized their weekly routines around church activities, and attendance was considered an essential part of family life. Churches hosted fundraisers, dinners, holiday events, and youth programs, all of which helped bring neighbors together. The bells that marked the start of services also served as reminders of the community's shared values and rhythms, creating a sense of unity across the borough. Social clubs, volunteer fire halls, and fraternal organizations were also important parts of Etna's culture. These groups provided opportunities for gatherings, dances, meetings, and community service projects. People of all ages participated in these events, and they offered a break from the demands of work and daily responsibilities. Local celebrations, parades, and seasonal festivals brought residents into the streets, reinforcing the sense of belonging that defined small-town life in the 1930s. Entertainment was simple, but meaningful. Families listened to radio programs in the evenings, including news broadcasts, comedies, and serialized dramas that became part of the household routine. Weekend activities often included visits with relatives, picnics along the river, and community baseball games that drew crowds from across the neighborhood. Movie theaters in nearby towns offered an occasional outing, providing an accessible source of entertainment. The sense of safety and connection within the community was strong. Neighbors looked after one another, children played outside with minimal supervision, and households helped each other through illnesses, financial challenges, or unexpected needs. Front doors were often left unlocked during the day because trust was a natural part of daily life. The strength of these relationships helped families endure hardships, especially in the years following the Great Depression, and it reinforced the stability that many households depended on. As you look at the groups of people gathered on these streets, you might think about your own neighborhood and whether it feels more connected or more distant than what you see here. Overall, community and culture in Etna in 1937 were built on shared traditions, hard work, and a genuine commitment to one another. Residents formed strong bonds, participated in local events, and maintained customs that had been passed down through generations. These connections created a dependable foundation for daily life and helped shape the identity of the borough during a time of national change and recovery. Life in Etna in 1937 took place during a period of national recovery, political debate, and growing cultural influence, and families were more connected to these events than it might appear. Franklin D. Roosevelt was serving his second term as president, and his New Deal programs continued to shape the country's direction. Many people supported these efforts because they had provided relief during the hardest years of the Depression, while others were wary of the expanding role of government, which created a steady divide in political discussions. Conversations about work, wages, and national policies were common, and families followed news from Washington closely because federal decisions affected mill jobs, public projects, and local infrastructure. Radio was the centerpiece of information and entertainment, and nearly every home relied on it for daily updates. Families tuned in to hear President Roosevelt's fireside chats, which were broadcast in a calm, personal tone that helped people feel connected to national events. News reports covered labor disputes, factory conditions, and the ongoing discussions about Social Security and workers' protections, all of which were especially relevant in industrial towns like Etna. While the radio delivered news, it also provided entertainment that became part of everyday life. Popular radio programs in 1937 included the Jack Benny program, The Shadow, and comedy sketches like Fibber McGee and Molly, which families gathered around to enjoy in the evenings. Music was equally influential. Swing and big band music dominated the airwaves, and the upbeat sound was a welcome contrast to the difficulties of the early 1930s. Songs like 1 O'Clock Jump and Sing, Sing, Sing were widely recognized, and they played in homes, restaurants, and social halls throughout the region. Movies were also a major part of American culture, and residents of Etna often traveled into Pittsburgh or nearby boroughs to visit local theaters. In 1937, films such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Stage Door, Captains Courageous, and The Good Earth attracted large audiences. Movie-going was affordable and offered an escape from daily challenges, and families appreciated the chance to see well-known actors like Clark Gable and Katharine Hepburn. The film industry was growing rapidly, and its influence could be felt even in small boroughs like this one. International events were also beginning to shape the public's understanding of what might lie ahead. Tensions were rising in Europe as Germany expanded under Adolf Hitler, and conflict was escalating in Asia with Japan's invasion of China. Newspapers and radio updates made these developments impossible to ignore, and younger men in Etna, especially those just entering adulthood, followed these reports with caution because they knew military involvement could eventually reach the United States. Even with these broader events in the background, everyday life in Etna remained grounded in familiar routines. Families worked, saved, raised children, and supported one another, because that was the foundation that carried them through uncertain times. Music, movies, and radio offered entertainment and connection. Politics shaped conversations about work and stability, and international news hinted at a future no one could yet imagine. In 1937, Etna stood at a moment between recovery and change, and the scenes captured in this film show the world as it looked before those changes arrived. As you watch these final moments of the footage, you might find yourself thinking about what happened next for the people you see here, knowing what history would bring in just a few years. What you have seen in this film is a straightforward look at daily life in Etna in 1937, captured at a time when the country was recovering, families were rebuilding, and communities like this one were returning to a steadier rhythm. The people shown here were going about their routines on ordinary days, unaware that their movements, their clothing, their work habits, and their surroundings would someday serve as a record of how life once looked in a small Pennsylvania borough shaped by industry and tradition. Nothing in this footage was staged or prepared, and that is what gives it its value, because it reflects real life as it happened. For those of us watching now, this kind of film is more than a curiosity, it is a reminder that most of history is lived quietly, in homes, on streets, and in small towns that rarely make the headlines. It is lived by people whose names we will never know, but whose routines, sacrifices, and hopes made the world we inherited. As you leave this video, you might think about the places in your own life that feel ordinary right now, and how they might look to someone 80 years from today. I'm Rowan, and this is OTRA Legends. Until next time, happy hunting.